Let's talk about nuclear power. Everybody's got nuclear power on their mind. Obviously, China's doing a really good job of executing on it, and there's some new science here. So fill us in. Sachs looks so engaged. Let's go.
Well, Sachs might like it because it's a bit of an economic story and a bit of a China competitive story, which I think is the main point here. The story is rooted in a paper that was published out of China on their new high temperature gas cooled pebble bed reactor, which is a new type of nuclear reactor technology that shows that this thing cannot melt down, which is an amazing new technology. But I want to just take a step back and talk about general electricity production in the US versus China and where it's headed. So today, the US has roughly 1 terawatt of total electricity production capacity. China today has about 3 terawatts of total electricity production capacity. And about, 2 to 3% of that is nuclear today for China. So by 2050, the US is projected to build out an additional terawatt to getting us to 2 terawatts of capacity. So we're going to double our total electricity output by 2050. China, meanwhile, has a plan stated to increase electricity production to 8.7 terawatts. So basically tripling between now and 2050. 88% of their power by 2050 will be renewables. And by 2060, they've stated this goal that they want about 18% of their overall power to come from nuclear reactors. They currently have 26 nuclear reactors in the construction phase. They've got planning going on around building 300 of these. And they've already got stated plans around 500 gigawatts of capacity. Just to give you a sense of that, 500 gigawatts, which is what China's got plans for, is half of the total US electricity production today. That's in their nuclear build out. Today, just to give you a sense on the relative cost of electricity, China's about 7 to 9 cents a kilowatt hour. The US is 17 to 25 cents a kilowatt hour. And China is projected to drop their price to less than 6 cents due to the expansion of renewables and nuclear power in the country. So the US cost is about triple what it is in China to build out new electricity capacity. That's a really important point. So currently we have about a third of what China has. China's going to triple. We're going to double by 2050. Their cost is already lower than ours, and it's going to get lower. And their cost to build out new electricity is a fraction of what it is in the US. So this is a massive difference. The International Energy Agency estimates that the electricity from nuclear power costs $65 per megawatt hour in China compared to 105 in the US and 140 in the EU. And recent data has US costs looking like they might be anywhere from 5 to up to 10 times what it costs to build out in China. So this is a real important long-term competitive point. China has more electricity production, it's cheaper to make electricity, and it's cheaper to build new capacity, and they're building at an accelerated rate. And this really highlights the industrial challenge the United States is going to have in the decades ahead. We talk a lot about wanting to onshore manufacturing in the US, build out new manufacturing technologies, but ultimately, all of these industries, particularly AI, are going to be driven by the cost of power. So, Nick, if you pull up this chart, so what's gone on in nuclear? Well, there's effectively considered to be 4 generations of nuclear reactors. The first generation was all the early prototypes, and I've got an image up here to show this comes from the Department of Energy. The second generation, which was the first kind of commercial power reactor, started to get built out in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And then these Gen 3 reactors were these lighter weight reactors that were kind of more advanced. Gen 4 is the next generation of nuclear power reactors. And they're next generation because they're meant to be much more safe, where they cannot theoretically have a meltdown. You can't have a nuclear meltdown like you had with Fukushima or with 3 Mile Island.
And to be clear, Fukushima was generation 2. Those are the boiling water reactors, yeah?
Yeah. And so these old reactors have this risk where if where you pump water in to cool down the reactor and to drive the turbine. And if the water pumping system fails and you can't get the rods out of the reactor, then the reactor keeps reacting. The uranium keeps having this kind of chain reaction, gets hotter and hotter, and eventually gets so hot, it melts all the walls and all the surrounding materials of the reactor, and all of the nuclear rods start to evaporate, and all this nuclear material is released into the environment. That's the risk of a meltdown, ultimately. This is not a nuclear bomb, just to be clear. This is just about really high temperatures, melting the facility, and then radioactive material escapes the facility. The Gen 4 reactors are designed where that isn't possible. And so one of the first, if you go to this next slide, you'll see just kind of an image here. This is the new reactor called the pebble bed reactor. China started this facility. I don't want to butcher the name, but I think I will. It's at the Xiaodawan site in Shandong province. It's a 210 megawatt electricity production reactor. They started construction in 2012. They finished and started doing operational tests in December of 22. They ran all the safety tests in the summer of 23, where they turned off the cooling and basically simulated that the system failed to see if it would melt down. And that's the results that they just published, which was the tests they ran last summer. And even when they turned everything off, the system did not fail. It did not have a meltdown. It maintained its ability to control its temperature and not have a meltdown. And the way it works, as you can see here, is that these little pebbles, they're kind of like billiard ball sized pebbles, have uranium in their core. These pebbles kind of drop into this the center reactor chamber. And when the uranium is close to other uranium, a chain reaction starts to generate heat. That heat is actually, in this reactor concept, captured by helium gas that's circulated inside around the reactor. That hot helium gas heats up water, turns a turbine, generates electricity. And then these billiard balls fall out the bottom. So what they did is they simulated that the system stopped circling, that the power went out, and measured what happened ultimately. It was able to recover. It didn't melt down. And this is quite different, Nick, if you show an old model of an old nuclear rod system. So here's nuclear rods. They're made of uranium. They go inside these chambers that have other uranium. And when they touch each other or get close to each other, they heat up. And you have water that has to be pumped continuously to keep it cool, to maintain a low temperature. What happened in Fukushima and other facilities where we've had meltdowns is that the water stopped pumping. Everything kind of evaporated away, and the rods didn't get pulled. If the rods can't get pulled out and the water can't keep pumping, you have a meltdown. When things get so hot, it melts everything around it and collapses. So this Chinese site just demonstrated this pebble bed reactor, which is a Gen 4 reactor. And it has extraordinary safety profile. There's, basically no condition where the system would have a meltdown. So these Gen 4 reactors are smaller, they're more modular, they're much, much safer, they're more efficient, they have much less waste. You still have to store those used billiards somewhere. So you still have to kind of take them and put them somewhere and keep them underground for 10,000 years. But compared with previous reactors, this plant is designed to be much more efficient, much safer. And they completed the safety test. They published the results on the safety test. And I think it really shows the performance is there. And this was always meant to be future technology, these Gen 4 reactors. China opened up commercial operations of this reactor in December of 2023. So it's running, it's producing power, it's on the grid. And, this design, funny enough, was first proposed in the 1940s. And it took us nearly 100 years to get it to market, which makes me also point out why I'm so optimistic 100 years from now on fusion technology, which seemed crazy today. And this sort of technology seemed crazy at the time, but 80 years later, we've gotten there. So, this was an exciting outcome, but I really do want to highlight the competitiveness with China. Lower cost to produce, lower cost to run,
and the
much
downstream,
safer, and they're expanding like crazy.
And the downstream is they can power more H100s.
The U.S. This is why I asked Donald Trump when he came on the show, and I want to make my passionate plea. This is why investing in and deregulating nuclear reactor technology in the United States to enable a competitive playing field with the United States and China in the decades ahead is so critical. Because if we don't, China will beat the United States industrially, and we will eventually find ourselves in a greater point of conflict with respect to this rising power that is going to be driven by low-cost, highly abundant power. And the United States does not have that.
Power equals AI. Yeah.
You don't think that distributed energy can basically deliver effectively energy at a marginal cost of zero?
Yeah, so the solar build-out, Chamath, is in the U.S. forecast where we can get, in an optimistic scenario, a doubling of power output from 1 terawatt to 2. That's in the system today, in the forecast. But how do we get to 9? That's where China's going to be at by 2050. And we have to have this ability to more rapidly kind of accelerate, high power output systems like nuclear. Because while solar is great, it's a low power output. You need, a much more volume. So this is a highly concentrated system. And the cost per megawatt hour, can be significantly competitive if you use these small modular reactors and accelerate rollout like China's doing.
What about carbon-based solutions as a fallback?
Difficult to scale. I mean, we're not going to open up 500 more coal power plants in the next couple of years.
What about oil and nat gas?
Yeah. So today, nat gas is 44% of U.S. power production capacity, and we are going to build out, and we are building out new nat gas facilities, but that's in the forecast. So all of our forecasts today for the U.S. are mostly nat gas going out, and a lot of solar and wind going out to 2050 to double our capacity. And it's already a stretch for us to be able to double our capacity.
So the only solution is to rewrite the regulation.
We have to get nuclear going in the United States. And these systems are safe, they are scalable. And if the United States embraced this and we took a public policy perspective that this is about competitiveness with China, it's about national security, I'm hopeful that whoever comes in to lead the executive branch in this next administration will be really thoughtful and make this a top priority. So that's my plea and my reason for going through this today.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.